Started? All right, we'll go ahead and get started, and then everybody else can come on in. Everyone else can come on in. Okay, all right. Hey guys, I'm so excited to introduce Laura Johnson. She's the executive director of the Blackland Prairie Raptor Center. Many of you already know her. I could do a whole presentation on Laura, but I don't think that that's really what we came for. So Laura has been, right, oh, okay. Laura has started at the Raptor Center as a volunteer about 5 years ago. Then she became the training coordinator, then she became the education and training manager. And about 2 years ago, she became the executive director. And I've been there 3 years, so I've really been able to witness a miraculous, wonderful vision that she has, and she's really moving our center forward. A little bit about her, she has an MBA from Texas Women's University. She's working on her Ph.D., almost finished. In behavioral science, she's also an adjunct professor at the Chicago School. She's an entrepreneur. She owns her own business, Events by Laura Ann, and she's a wife. Her husband's here somewhere. Raise your hand. There he is. And she's a mother of a 1-year-old who took first steps about 6 weeks ago and now is running everywhere. So she's a very busy lady, but she wasn't too busy to come and talk to us tonight. So I'm really happy to welcome you. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Marla. That was a very kind introduction. I do have the honor and privilege of serving as the executive director of the Blackland Prairie Raptor Center, aka the Bird Farm. Thank you, Pat. We have been called a lot of things, and Bird Farm is new to the list. So, but I get it. We nurture nature and we care for birds, so I can kind of see how that works out. Now, when Marla first asked me if I would be interested and willing in doing this presentation and being a guest speaker, I was elated. I love being able to share my personal passion with folks that I know also share that passion. So it was an immediate yes. And then the next thing that went through my mind is, okay, what can we do that is different than what you have seen in prior Raptor Center presentations? Because raise your hand, who has seen a Raptor presentation before? Yep, I felt pretty confident coming into this room, out of all the rooms I could possibly walk into, that pretty much every hand would go into the air. Either you have been to the Raptor Center, you visited, you've done these presentations, you volunteered, and so I wanted to bring something tonight that was a little bit different. So hopefully you'll walk away learning something new. And if you're still looking to see that bird presentation, make sure to come visit us on site. We'll talk about that a little bit later. But with that, we're going to go ahead and talk this evening more so take a deeper dive into our ambassador program. Now, as far as our agenda this evening, I'm just going to touch briefly on our mission because I have to in every presentation. I can't help myself, but I will spend primarily majority of our time speaking specifically of that bridge between rehab and education. We're going to talk a little bit about our evaluation process for identifying potential ambassadors that are unreleasable. And then we're going to talk a little bit about making sure that we are treating those birds with the utmost respect, making sure they have the highest care quality possible, and then talk a little bit about our training process. We went through a substantial change about 5 years ago in how we handle and train with our birds. And so I want to take a deeper dive into what that looks like on a daily basis so that you guys will start to see and understand how we do that. Then we're going to wrap up our presentation with understanding why Raptor ambassadors matter, why these individuals that cannot be released find a new job serving a completely different purpose, and the value that they bring to folks all around North Texas. Then at the very end, you will still get to see Raptors. We'll go through each one of our ambassador team members in case you haven't had a chance to meet them before and tell a little bit about their story. One thing that we're going to talk about a lot this evening is that there is no quick fix. There is no one solution that fits every bird. They are all individualized, and so their journey looks a little bit different for each and every one of them. Our organization as a whole has 3 primary pillars. We have our conservation pillar, which I know a lot of you are involved and engaged with. We have our rehabilitation, which a lot of you are engaged with, and education, which a lot of you are engaged with as well. Tonight, we're going to focus primarily on that bridge between rehab and education. Once those birds have been identified as unreleasable, what does that journey look like? In evaluating whether or not they could potentially find a home as an ambassador in the education department at our center or partnering with another facility. We do both of those. Now, when it comes to evaluating a possible raptor ambassador, there's a few things that we do every single time. So the first thing we're going to look at is look at the individual and have specific things for those specific species that we're looking for. In 2017, there was a paper released about taking in owls that are adults from a rehab facility and putting them in an educational setting. This study evaluated their cortisol levels, which is their stress hormone. And what the study saw is that even if a bird had been under human care for 20 years, those cortisol levels, those stress hormones never came down. We are seeing effects of birds not having youngsters, meaning they weren't laying eggs, their bodies were not functioning as they should. A lot of those stressors continued well into 10, 15, 20 years being in those environments. And so at that point, it was determined that from an ethical standpoint, if it is an owl species, they would come specifically from a breeding program for educational purposes or as a youngster. Here on this screen, we have 3 of our ambassadors. The 2 on top are our eastern screech owls, that's Ginger and Pepper. They were both bred specifically to be educational ambassadors. They came to us from another center. They were born and raised specifically so they could be trained to be educators for their species. Charlotte is the great horned owl as a youngster at the bottom. She was imprinted accidentally when someone took her in, not realizing that they were doing something that would impact the rest of her life. They started feeding her, caring for her, and at that point, she was unreleasable. She looked to humans for food. She was exhibiting a lot of different baby bird behaviors that we typically look for, doing those bird calls that she shouldn't be doing to a human. And at that point, we had to make the decision that she would forever have a home with us or another facility. For Charlotte in particular, she ended up having a forever home with us, and she is one of our ambassadors now. So that's one of the things that we look at when we're evaluating a bird. It doesn't necessarily have to be a bird that has been injured in the wild. It just needs to be a bird that this is a good option for them, whether they're specifically bred for this purpose or not. Now, as far as being unreleasable, there's certain species that we can have if they have some sort of vision impairment, if they have only one eye. We have another ambassador that has just one eye, and he was deemed unreleasable for that reason. And he was a youngster, so he was imprinted to be an ambassador. A couple other things we look at: does the bird have full mobility? This is something we'll talk about a little bit later when we talk about general welfare of birds. We want to make sure that the animal can move around just fine, preen themselves, meaning manipulate their feathers, make sure that they're clean, do behaviors they should be doing just to maintain themselves. If the bird is unable to do that, for instance, if it's missing a wing or missing several digits on their feet, so they're having trouble standing, they might not be a great candidate for an ambassador program. Now, as far as welfare and management, we do a few things to ensure that our animals are well cared for the best possible way. Obviously, our goal whenever we have a patient come into a rehab hospital is to try to get them back out into the wild if that's the best fit for them. We want to make sure that an animal is not going to be in pain on an ongoing basis, but we also want to make sure that if they're under human care the rest of their life, they're not going to be stressed. So that's something we look for. We do continuous welfare evaluations on all of our ambassadors. Depending on their age and depending on any sort of medical concerns, that time frame and frequency can change. For instance, Sweet Pea, raise your hand if you know Sweet Pea as one of our ambassadors, right? She's well known. She's been around for 22 years, and she has checks about once a quarter by our vet just to make sure she's doing okay, make sure that her welfare is still doing well, making sure she's not in too much pain just from general aging issues. Then we have some of our youngsters that are only about a year old, and they go to the vet just like we would go to the vet once a year for an annual checkup. So we want to continually make sure from a physical standpoint that they're doing well. A couple of other things that we look at is more on the emotional side. We want to make sure that our birds are not freaking out if they see people walk by. If we see a bird that is flying to the walls or flying to the ceiling whenever they see a human, probably not a great ambassador and might need to be evaluated. If they've already been placed in a facility, be evaluated to see if they're truly the right tool for the job, or maybe if there's another option. There's a wide variety of different options available for ambassadors. They don't have to go travel and be on programs. Sometimes they can be in what we call a static display, meaning they stay in one habitat and they offer educational experiences by folks being able to see those animals up close, but they're in an environment that's a lot more conducive to them as an individual. Couple other things that we're constantly making sure that we're evaluating is just ensure that the care is specific to the individual. For instance, one of the things that we have to do because we are accredited by the USDA is that we have to provide enrichment to every single one of our animals and have it recorded on a daily basis. Enrichment can look different for each individual. We have some birds like Charlotte, the great horn that I just showed you guys a picture of when she was a youngster, who loves to destroy things. And that's okay if it's paper, not okay if it's soft plastic that she's ingesting. And so each bird has their own list of items that they can and cannot have, but that is to provide them enrichment on a daily basis to make sure that their welfare is more than just sitting in an enclosure all day. We want to provide them with experiences to make sure their lives are enriched more than just sitting there on a perch. That can also look like things like modifying their environment, taking a bird on a walk, taking them to a new experience. We have several birds within our collection that go on program and they could not be happier being in front of thousands of people. And then we have some that are better suited for smaller groups. So making sure we're keeping that in mind for their experience while also educating folks all around the area. Training with trust. This is my personal favorite thing to talk about. My background is in behavior analysis, which is the science of behavior modification. So it's really looking at what variables in an environment can be modified in order to make a behavior more likely or less likely to occur. So what that looks like in the applied bird world is that we spend a lot of time building trust with our birds. They know that we're not going to put them in an environment that would make them uncomfortable. And so they are more likely to come out to go on program. They're more likely to do the things that we ask of them because it's voluntary on their part. They get to choose whether or not to participate. What that looks like is using positive reinforcement. Anybody heard of positive reinforcement before? Maybe teachers, right? It's great. You're trying to get your husband to help with the dishes. You say, if you help him with the dishes, you can watch the Cowboys game. It's great. It works on birds and humans. And so the science is applied in lots of different settings and truly makes it such a great experience for all, right? It's a win-win. They're getting a reward for doing something that we're asking them to do, and we're having a bird that's voluntarily doing the things we're asking them to do. So truly a great experience for both. One of the things that we really look at, difference between reinforcer and punisher, right? We say we use positive reinforcement. Well, what does that mean? It means that we're applying, so that's the positive part, something that increases the likelihood of a behavior happening again. Punishment, on the other hand, is something that would be applied to make it less likely for that behavior to happen again. And it doesn't have to be really aggressive. I feel like when people hear the word punishment, they immediately think it's something horrendous, right? Like hitting a bird or something like that. Not that we use punishment, but I think that's important for this conversation. We're thinking about this scientifically. So reinforcement means it's more likely to happen again. Punishment means it's less likely to happen again. And both of those are what we consider a consequence. We talk about the ABCs of training, and we look at the antecedent, the behavior, and the consequence. So let's say, for instance, we're trying to train a bird to do one of our easiest behaviors. We usually use this behavior in the very early stages of the building trust, and that behavior is simply to get onto a scale. Voluntarily, we bring in a scale and we want the bird to hop on that scale. Well, what are some things we can do as an antecedent? One of the things is modifying the environment. So if we're bringing in that scale and maybe going to an area that they're really familiar with, chances are that bird is going to be a lot more likely to do what we're asking if they're in a comfortable space, if they're familiar with their environment. If I were to take a bird that I don't necessarily have a great relationship with yet, put them into an environment that they've never seen and ask them to do something crazy, like put their feet on a scale they've never seen, chances are a lot less that they're going to do that. So what are things that we can modify in their environment to really try to make it more likely for the behaviors to happen that we are looking for? So that's the first thing. The second thing is evaluating the behavior. So we want to reinforce that behavior we're looking for. We see this a lot. So I'll use vultures as an example. Vultures are very smart, really good trainers. And so a lot of times they will modify their behavior to modify your behavior, but it's sometimes not what you're thinking. So for instance, if we have an opportunity to walk in with one of our vultures, if it's their first time seeing you, they might be testing the waters a little bit. They might go for a shoelace. One of the things that every single vulture has in common is that they love to pull shoelaces, and it is the one behavior that they are not supposed to do. So what they might do is you might walk in, they try to pull at your shoelaces. That's a behavior we're not wanting to see, right? So instead of putting your hand down with a bunch of food to distract them, because if we're giving them food to distract them, what's going on there? Yep, you're starting a behavior loop of a behavior you don't want to see. Things that we don't think about, right? Nobody thinks about that sort of contingency on a daily basis. But when you're starting to really evaluate behaviors and really monitoring your own responses to them, you start to see the world in a completely different way. Vultures are great in turning humans into what we call meat fountains, meaning that you're trying to get them to stop whatever they're doing by throwing food in a different direction. And then they just start doing a loop. So that's something that great trainers of new trainers, because they will find all the little loopholes to get away with something. But it just gives you a different framework to think off of, right? You're constantly trying to evaluate, is this a behavior I want to see again? Is this not a behavior I want to see again? And that's what's going to affect our response. Now, as far as our ethical type of behavior change, this is a shift that happened, honestly, started in marine mammals about 50 years ago. We started to see this shift. B.F. Skinner, I'm sure every person in this room has heard of B.F. Skinner, and the work that he did as a psychologist, really evaluating behavior change. The science has only been around about 100 years. And we saw it first applied with marine mammals. Imagine trying to get a very, very large animal to do something when you're not even near them. If you're trying to give them direction, you have to become pretty quick about how to modify behavior. We started to see this second, probably in the bird world. We started to see bird shows. We started to see some different types of bird experiences that were often offered about 30 years ago. And we're starting to see it more and more in the zoo field as a whole, with lots of different taxa, lots of different species. It's always effective. It can happen in a protected contact setting or in a free contact setting, meaning that we can be in the enclosure with the animal or outside the enclosure with the animal, but always keeping in mind each side has its own challenges. A couple of our behaviors you'll see tonight are protected contact, just because it's more conducive, again, to the environment that we're asking a specific behavior. And then majority of what we do is considered free contact. Now, as far as voluntary participation, voluntary participation, this is really a key point of everything that we do. We practice assent with our birds, meaning that we do not interact with them unless they tell us they want to interact with us. And you think, well, how in the world does that happen? These guys can't talk. It's pretty simple, actually. We train them to go to a specific perch when they are ready to work. And what's really cool is when you're giving a tour and you're walking down the center and all of a sudden all these birds start coming to the door. And that's because their yes perch, a lot of the times, is their door perch. So it does make it really nice when you're giving a tour because the birds do come up. But also we can tell before we even enter a mew if a bird is not feeling it. Let's say, for instance, I'm going to train a hawk, and before I even get inside of her enclosure, I see that she's looking up at the sky. She's obviously very nervous about something. Chances are she's not going to want to participate in a session. And so I probably won't even ask if she wants to at that point, because I'm going to let her settle down and probably try to check out what's around her in case there is something that's serious that we need to make sure we're trying to intervene on. But again, that comes to arranging an environment that's built on success. We want to make sure we're teeing them up for success in our relationship at all times. A couple of different types of behaviors that we train. If you've ever seen one of our programs, Obviously, you've seen a bird on the glove. That's how we present majority of our birds. And it's incredibly difficult to train a bird to sit on a glove. Seems so simple, but when you think about a bird, everything in their body is telling them not to be on a glove, right? Their birds are meant to escape behavior. Most of their behavior is maintained through escape. So that in itself is a huge feat. To have a bird sitting on glove calmly, especially in front of a lot of people, those are all steps that we take into account when we're training a bird for a program. The second thing we have to think about is how are we going to get the bird to that program? Crate training is another world that's really interesting. You look at a hawk versus an owl, and that's going to be completely different training methodology. You think about an owl and a crate, which is a small dark space. They're probably going to think, yeah, I'll jump into that small dark space. That sounds great. I'm an owl. A hawk, on the other hand, is not about that. So we have to start getting creative, and we shape up that crating behavior a little bit differently depending on the individual. The other important thing that we take into account is that animal's history, especially when we did the transition to how we're training the birds now, is that to this day, we have some birds that will not crate. That crate was not seen as something that was good, and it wasn't even done intentionally. It just wasn't trained to be positive. The easiest animals sometimes to work with are little tiny babies that have no prior history that could potentially impact their current training or future training. And so those are some challenges that we have to think about. When you see a bird come onto program, there's a lot of different factors that come into play. We're going to look at the environment itself. We're going to look at how many people are going to be there, the trainers available to go, the environment that they're going to be in. Are they inside? Are they outside? Those are all decisions that we think through when we say yes to a program and identifying which birds go. The other factor is that they have to voluntarily say yes, meaning when we go in there, they have to step up on their own. We're not forcing any birds to go. We're not pulling on any jesses. They're actively saying, yes, I want to go participate and I want to go out of my enclosure and go somewhere with you. A couple of other different types of behaviors we train. At the very top here, this is Loki. He's one of our black vultures. His favorite behavior in the world is his foot behavior, and that's what he's demonstrating here. This is a great behavior because it helps from a husbandry and from a veterinarian standpoint. We can evaluate his feet. We can trim his nails voluntarily by him positioning his foot up on the wire. He is trained to 1 and 2. That's what we call discrimination trainings. We're asking for 1 foot, or if we're asking for the other foot, and he'll lift up the other one. If you ever come behind the scenes, he'll probably offer it. He loves doing it. He knows he gets a lot of attention for it. But it is under stimulus control, meaning that we can ask him if we do need to actually do something with his feet. Another behavior that we're seeing here is actually with some baby imprints vultures that are going to another facility, and they are standing on top of a scale. That's that scale behavior I mentioned in the beginning. One of the first behaviors that we train a bird to do is station, so we can easily maneuver them around. Getting them to stand on an actual wobbly scale is kind of the second layer to that. So, obviously there's a lot that goes into that. There's weight balance, making sure that they stay there until the beep so we can get an accurate weight. So I love this photo of them, and they're demonstrating their behavior perfectly for their future home. Now, as far as training plans go, this is something we think through. Cheryl is our Raptor Ambassador Manager now, and she's been with us for about 2 years. And so whenever we're evaluating a training plan or determining which birds we're going to train for which particular behaviors, this is something we usually talk through together, especially if it's something that is challenging. Sometimes it's great to have multiple heads thinking through something to do or a challenge to navigate, because there are a lot of things that come into play when it comes to training. And sometimes it's just that we have kind of like a mind block against it. So the idea is to truly make sure we're looking at the individual, kind of like I mentioned before, their past history with a particular item, making sure we're evaluating the behavior itself. It's going to be really hard to teach a vulture how to hover like a kestrel. They just physically are not going to be able to do that. So we wouldn't train them to do that. We want to make sure that these behaviors are setting them up for success and achieving their goals. Now, why do ambassadors matter? Not just that we're providing homes for birds that can't be released, but they serve a really important role. Their goal in life, at least at our center for purpose reasons, they are to help create a connection with wildlife. A lot of people, I know this room is not necessarily the best room to evaluate because you guys all care way more than probably the average human about nature and our impact on it. But when it comes to the general public, people don't think about what happens when you throw an apple core out of your window when you're driving down the highway. They don't think about the rat that crawls up to that apple core, eats the apple core, and then the red-tailed hawk that gets hit by a car trying to hunt that rat. It's number one reason we have birds come into our rehab facility is being hit by cars. Another thing they don't think about is whenever they have rodenticide out and they're trying to kill their local rats, and then all of a sudden an animal like an owl tries to eat that rat that's slower than usual because it's dying, and then it's poisoned by rodenticide. Having an opportunity for people to see birds up close and learn about them plays a pivotal role in our education factor. People are not going to change their behavior unless they understand why it's so important. So these birds help build that gap, or bridge that gap, I should say, so that we can create those memorable experiences. A lot of times when we go to programs, depending especially on the neighborhood, some of the children have never even seen an animal outside of a dog or a cat before. So being able to see their eyes light up when they see an animal, especially one that can be viewed as really scary and aggressive and harmful, being able to learn about them and their special adaptations that make them so unique, that is something that brings so much joy and helps educate and further their species out in the wild on those little tiny small changes that people can make in their life that have a significant impact on wildlife. Now, as far as meet the team, before we jump in, any questions on the information I have shared so far? Oh, yes, in the back. Do birds, specifically raptors, respond well to clicker training? Absolutely. And I'll actually address why we don't use clicker training. I think it's great. It can be a wonderful tool. I'll kind of share a little bit about what clicker training is too, if you aren't familiar with that. So clicker training is something simple where it's called a secondary reinforcer, or in layman's terms, a bridge. And so what that is it's an immediate reinforcer that represents the delivery of a primary reinforcer. So typically followed up by food is usually what's associated with a clicker. And so whenever you see a behavior you want to see again, you would click and deliver a reward. So something like a piece of food or scratches or whatever, depending on the individual. The reason we don't use clicker training at the Raptor Center is because a lot of the training we're doing, we are talking about the animals while we're doing it. And so it's hard to manipulate a clicker and manipulate the food and talk about the bird all at the same time. So that's why we personally don't use it. I think they can be a great tool. We do have a verbal bridge, which is good. And in the beginning stages of training a new behavior, we do use that bridge just because it's a lot easier than handling something else. But we use it as a marker. You might have also called it or heard it called a marker, especially in dog training. They tend to use marker, but that's what that means. And that's the only reason we don't do it, but they can be trained using a clicker for consistency. Yes. A verbal bridge. It is, in our case, the word good, but it can be anything. I've also used a verbal yes for an animal that was scared of the word good or scared of a clicker because it's a little bit not as intimidating. So it can be whatever you want it to be, but we use good. Do we have another question? All right, we'll move right along. So I wanted to share a little bit about our ambassadors that we have at the center, how they came to be with us. Again, because I've spoken so much about their uniqueness as an individual. We have a couple of our owls here, actually all of our owls. We have more owls than any other group. I actually learned that when I put this presentation together. I never think about that. So we have Gizmo, who came to us from World Bird Sanctuary in Missouri. He came to the center as a baby. He had a great horn talon go right through his eye and through his skull. And so he lost his eye and did have some skull damage from that injury. And at that point, he was a baby. World Bird decided to make a decision to imprint him and make him an ambassador and not a candidate for release. And so he was purposely imprinted on for educational purposes as a baby. He's been at our center for, it'll be 2 years in June. Then we have Charlotte as a grown-up. You saw Charlotte as a baby. and she's our great horn. She'll be 3 this spring. She came to us as an imprint. The folks that had her for at least 2 weeks. And when she came in, she was still a little white fluff ball, and she was baby bird calling constantly. And instead of walking away from us, she ran right out of her kennel to us, baby bird asking for food. And so we knew at this point it was too late. We couldn't, quote unquote, wild her up, as we sometimes try to do in rehab if we have one that's a little bit too friendly with humans, but could potentially be with others of its species and learn some of those wild behaviors. She was past that point. We have Sweet Pea, who is well known. She is 22 years old. She has been with us for a very long time. She's actually one of our original ambassadors in our department, and she is fully retired. So if you haven't seen Sweet Pea for a few years, that's because she's living her best life at home, has great medical care, has great free food, and is well taken care of. We have Ginger and Pepper, who were clutch mates. They came from the Illinois Raptor Center, specifically bred for educational purposes. And so they've been with us probably 4 years now, I think. And they live separate, even though they're clutch mates, but really great birds, have been doing this for quite a long time. Meet the team. We've got our Falcons up next. I bet probably everyone has seen Cleo. She is our rock star. She is photographed more than probably any of our other birds. Again, I learned a lot of birds doing this presentation because I looked through a lot of photos. And she goes to everywhere and anywhere. If we do a news spot at a news station, she's usually a candidate that we bring along because she is what I call bomb-proof. She is a great bird. She's always our first bird that we train in new trainers on because she's very forgiving and she's willing to take things slow, and she is a-okay with it. We have Wilbur, who is a male kestrel, and he came to us, I think he's about probably 6 years, no, probably longer than that, a little bit older. He's a male kestrel, so he does have that beautiful coloration. He was an imprint, and so was Cleo. Cleo actually went up to someone at a park and was baby bird calling, and the lady called in saying, there's this bird that's wandering around and it's making all these noises and it's kind of scaring me. And we went out, and of course it was Cleo, who was just trying to get some food, and she didn't understand why this lady didn't see her as another little lady trying to get some snacks from her. So she became an ambassador. Last on the far right is Iris. And Iris and Cleo are really wonderful examples. This is one of the reasons why I wanted to talk through this a little bit, because even though they are both 2 female American kestrels, they are on the polar opposite ends of the spectrum when it comes to behavior. Even though they look identical, anyone who has ever worked with them would know within a split second of going into an enclosure which one it is, because as gentle and calm as Cleo is, Iris is a little spicy, and she is more than happy to respond very quickly and take advantage of a situation. And so she's one of our birds that we don't have a ton of people work with her a lot, just because she's one of the birds that you have to have a really good understanding of their speed, what you're doing with your hands at all times, things like that, because she is a real character. But great bird. She does really well when it comes to being in front of some smaller groups of folks. She's one that's kind of still in training in a lot of ways. We have 2 different species of hawks on our team. We have Genesis, who is an ambassador. She was a former falconry bird. She's actually our only former falconry bird on our team. She was a falconry bird for about 14 years before she was retired and came to live at the Raptor Center. And so she does some programming. We had her out actually yesterday at a photo shoot. A really beautiful bird. She's a larger subspecies of Harris's hawk. So she's about 1,000 grams. And if you guys know anything about birds, it's actually a really large Harris's hawk, usually around 700 grams. So pretty big size, great bird. She's now about 20, a little over 20 years, I think. Then we have RG, who came to us from the Audubon Center Audubon Center of Birds of Prey in Florida. He was imprinted. Now we're thinking he probably was purposely kicked out of the nest as a baby because he does have some interesting feather issues. His feathers just break very easily. We've tried a lot of things. We're consulting with other centers, and it's kind of like if your nails or hair were to just break really easily, they're really brittle. And so because of that, you can't really tell too much in this picture, but his feathers just break. And so he looks like he doesn't have a home. Um, It's true. So that's something we care about. He would never be able to survive in the wild, which we're thinking is maybe why his parents kicked him out. They probably knew something was wrong long before we figured it out 5 years later. But he would never be able to hunt or fly. This time of year, his feathers are not looking so great. He spends a lot of time exercising on the ground. We run him back and forth. But he was imprinted at such a young age. He is a fantastic bird in front of a lot of people. So that's something that is a really wonderful program. And this actually at this picture, he was at a gala in front of hundreds of people and he was completely fine. He was raised in an office setting and that has really carried him well throughout his entire training, even as an ambassador today. So if you see him in the summertime, that's when he looks the prettiest because his new feathers have just grown in. But then every year, kind of around the winter time, they start breaking off one by one. Here we have our vulture team, which if anyone has ever worked with a vulture, you know that they're rock stars in their own way. Very intelligent animals, sometimes too smart for their own good, but really fascinating to work with. All three of these individuals are very different from one another. We have Loki, who's been at the center for about 5 years, and he does the foot behavior. He's the one I talked about earlier. Fantastic bird working inside. He does indoor flights, things like that, as far as in our training facility at our property. We have Nigel, who is a turkey vulture. He arrived from Kentucky about 2 years ago. He was imprinted. We're thinking maybe he had maybe fell out of the nest or something because neurologically he's a little bit interesting. But really great bird, really great bird. Um, so he's great. He's a really fun team member. He's working on his training, so you won't see him on program yet, but he's working on that. And then we have Petunia, one of our rock stars. She goes to programs all over. She is fully flighted. She flies at programs. And she also does painting. So if you're interested in a fun experience, painting with Petunia is a memorable one. And you get to take home her painting. So that's a little shameless plug for one of our experiences. Here we have our two Mississippi kites. Both of these birds were just brought together last year was Zorchi's first year with us. Zorchi was in an enclosure full of other kites. All of them flew to the other side. Zorchi ran right up to us and we immediately knew this one is not right. So this one is a little bit broken. So she became an ambassador. She's a phenomenal ambassador. You might have already seen her on program at the center. She hasn't been with us very long, but her training has been really phenomenal. And so she's very calm on program. We have Missy, who's been with us probably 9 years, actually. I just looked this up. Missy's been with us for 9 years, so she's been with us a little bit longer. And so Sorchi's been kind of starting to pick up some more of those programs, and that way Missy doesn't go to all the programs. So that's kind of nice as far as work distribution between the two of them. They are housed together. These are our only birds that are ambassadors housed together, and that is because they are a social species. And so we always try to emulate their environment if possible. And because these two girls have done really well together, they hang out together all the time. They even share their perch. They do training sessions together. So that's really neat too. When we're training in new trainers, we can have one of us feed one and the other trainer feed the other. So we can help coach through that process a little bit as well. Now, as far as your support, it is everything for what we do. We could not do what we do on a daily basis with these ambassadors or any of our other birds in our rehabilitation clinic or our conservation team if it wasn't for the support of you guys and our surrounding community. We have lots of opportunities to get involved. Number one is volunteer. We have 160 volunteers at the Raptor Center, and about 60% of them are Texas Master Naturalists. So for that, I want to thank you for all of you that have put so many hours into our organization. I'd love to see if anyone that is a volunteer at the Raptor Center, can you please stand for just a moment? Fantastic. Thank you so much. We truly appreciate your partnership, your support. Coming to our events is huge. Our organization has, if you haven't been to one of our new events, I highly encourage it. And I'm not saying that as the executive director of the Raptor Center. I'm saying that as someone looking for fun things to do all the time because It's great. We have a lot of new things coming up. We have star party. We've never had a star party on our property. We have homeschool days, which have been great. We have field trips. We have camps. If you have kiddos or grandkiddos looking for somewhere to take them for spring break or summer camp, check out our website. We have lots of fun opportunities to engage kiddos more than we ever have before in the past. So along with that, we are open every first Saturday. That is something that we continue to do. We have started to add on to some of our different curriculum and activities. Thank you to some of you in the room that have been doing that and such an influential part of that. So really excited to bring more experiences to folks and diversify what we're offering currently. And of course, donating. 99% of our funding comes from individual donors. So truly, we appreciate you. Our birds are very expensive to take care of. That's something that we're getting ready for baby season. And you'll start to see, if you guys are on our newsletter, some education about how much our birds are as far as from the little nestling to being an adult. I just released a bird Super Bowl Sunday, and that patient was with us since June 30th, and his treatment was $7,000 for his time with us. So I know it's pretty amazing. If you are on our newsletter list, you will actually see our 2025 impact report being released probably in the next 2 weeks. And one of the cool facts on there that I include is how many mice our birds have eaten, how many rats our birds have eaten, because it is shocking as someone that just did the numbers the other day. So check that out. Definitely, I encourage you, if you're not a newsletter recipient, please join us on our website. Any event that you come to, you'll be added onto that as well. We want to share what we're doing with you guys and get you involved in ways that you might not be currently. If you have any questions, I'll hang out here. I think we have just a few minutes, actually. If anybody has any questions in the audience, I'm happy to answer those. I'll leave up our contact information here as well. Yes, Pat. Here. You're good. I need my steps.
Thank you. I apologize for being a bit of a mic hog tonight, but there's a lot of people around you doing some really important stuff. I work unabashedly at the Hagerman National Refuge, as well as Lori. We have one number. Oh, I just checked our bird count. We have 2 sets of bald eagles floating around right now. If an eagle goes down, it's a big deal. We have one number to call if a bald eagle gets injured or sick, and it's to the Blackland Prairie Raptor Center, bar none. You didn't highlight it, but you have an ambulatory service and you've got a veterinary service. It's a hospital. We only have one place to take a hurt eagle, and it's the only place we want to take a hurt eagle. So thank you for all the work that you do.
That's very kind. Thank you. Yeah.
This might be a little bit related, but I noticed that some of your birds, your ambassador birds, came from very far away, for example, Florida and Kentucky. And is that because they don't have a place to go that's close to them? So that is where you're actually very rare in what you offer. And also, how do they transport them without traumatizing them?
Great question, Rena. Okay, love that question because it's a good thing for me to mention. First of all, you are correct. Yes, we do have birds come from all over. And how that works is that we have a network where all of our different centers work together. And so, for instance, if we have 2 birds, like I mentioned, those black vultures, and that I had a picture on the scale, they're not going to be our forever birds. We're actually training them and housing them for another facility. It was a placement because we had 2 vultures. So when we had 2 imprinted vultures come in, we notified other organizations that we had 2 available for placement. And so at that time, we didn't have a red-shouldered hawk and that was available. That's RG. Turkey vulture, same way. Turkey vulture was interesting. Kentucky actually has a law that a bird cannot be placed or under human care if it's imprinted. And so the facility that he was in had, I think it was 30 days to find a forever home for that bird, or it had to be euthanized. And so different state regulation, just depending on the state, A World Bird Sanctuary. Cheryl actually came from World Bird Sanctuary, so that was really easy because she just drove him down, Gizmo with her. So a lot of different options. Whenever we have patients come in that could be a potential fit, we try to work together. As far as your question regarding raptor centers and if there's very many of them, there's just a couple hundred. And when I say that, there's a huge, I guess I should say, various levels of raptor center, because you can be permitted to take raptors, and then there are folks that specialize in raptors, which is what our facility does. We cannot take in other types of birds. We can only take in raptors. And we have other organizations in this area that they will take in raptors, admit them, and then transport them to us to care for them ongoing. And a lot of times we had a patient come in a few months ago that was admitted by North Texas Wildlife Center. They will call us if they have a special case come in. And it was a bald eagle. And to your point, Pat, a lot of centers are not permitted for bald eagles where we are. And so they had to transfer that patient to us for the care of that animal. Great question. We do, just shout out to rehab. We have one of the highest numbers of bird patients. We had 631 birds in 2025. One of the highest release rates as far as success as well. Our release rate's about 75%. Very proud of that. Yes. Oh, great. Two great questions. Favorite raptor. Okay, well, here is my little secret. So first question was, does Laura have a favorite raptor? Second question was, have I ever been hurt by a raptor? So first question, do I have a favorite? Oh gosh, this is hard. Anyone who works with me with these birds knows I probably have a couple of favorites, but they're like, you're kids, you can't say you have favorites, right? A few birds that I work with very closely. Charlotte, I hand raised her personally, so she and I are very close. Petunia, and I am one of three people that's Petunia's mom. One of Petunia's other mom is right over here. Karen Mitchell is one of Petunia's other moms, and then another one of our volunteers. So she's one that's very specific on who is on that tree of trust. RG is one of my favorites. Genesis. See, I just start listing all of them. So it's really hard to say. But when it comes to, have I ever been hurt by a raptor? I like that it was specific to raptor because before I worked at the Raptor Center, I worked with about 60 different species of birds, mammals, and reptiles. So I've worked with a lot of different animals. People ask me that question if I've only worked with birds. But I would say as far as raptor goes, nothing super serious. There was one time actually when Petunia and I are best of friends. She saw someone she did not like, and she was on my glove, and she just nipped me. And it wasn't even a bad thing. It was probably like the worst thing that's happened. I don't think I've had any other serious injuries, but we're also really mindful of that. If they're having a day that something is amiss, which can happen in that particular example, someone walked over to her that she didn't like, and she decided that she really had strong feelings about it out of the blue. And then she immediately went to baby bird, and it was interesting. So always being mindful. I do know people in the field that have lost eyes to animals before. I have seen people be severely injured. And a lot of it comes down to you're just not reading the animal, you're not paying attention, you're not evaluating the environment. And so we do everything in our power to make sure that doesn't happen. And if something does happen, it's because you messed up. Any questions? Yes.
We have two, I think you call them turkey vultures, that have been in the neighborhood for years, and they just like to sit together on my house mainly.
Yeah.
Is that what they do? Oh.
Yeah, the question is, we had some turkey vultures that just hang out on top of the house. Is that normal? And yep, that's pretty normal. They just tend to hang out. They know where food's at. Vultures are so funny because they don't have to work really hard for their food, right? So they're pretty opportunistic. Yeah, great question. Will I tell Petunia's backstory? Yeah, I kind of forgot to mention that part. So Petunia was housed by someone illegally. I would think you guys know this, but in the state of Texas, in anywhere in the United States, actually, it's a federal and state level. You cannot house or feed or take any part of an animal, of a raptor specifically, because it's illegal. And Petunia was being housed by someone as a pet. Now, as someone that works with these guys every day, I cannot even imagine that. But she was like in her house. He would follow her, follow his car to work. And he called us one day saying he didn't want to have this vulture anymore. He didn't know it was against the law. And so we went and he released the animal to us. And so Petunia became one of our ambassadors. And obviously at that point, she could not be released. She was heavily imprinted on. And at that point was about a year. Vultures imprint incredibly quickly, sometimes within 24 hours on people. They're very social animals. And so they're even more careful to watch. In fact, our imprints that we have right now for another facility, they were being housed by a rehabber that did not realize how quickly they imprint. And so they were accidentally imprinted. All right, I think we're out of time, but what I will do is I'll hang out over here. Love to answer any questions that you guys have. Thank you all so much for having me, and come out to the Raptor Center.
All right, we would appreciate your help in putting the room back in order. So the first 2 rows of chairs are going to go this way. All of the other chairs are going to go that way. If you would help us stack them up, we would.
Okay, so I close the meeting down? Okay. One.